Blessed are the birds of the air, for they carve a graceful arc in the sky. And blessed are the mountains and the seas and the valleys, for their variety makes rich our habitat. Blessed are the fields of grain, the orchards of fruit, for they give sustenance, asking nothing in return. Blessed are the dwellers on earth, for they cherish the privilege of living on it. Blessed are they who protect the earth and all her creatures, from the plants of the field to the trees of the forest, for their reward shall be harmony with the web of existence. Rejoice and be glad, for the earth and her people are one. So how are you planting your seeds this week? I want you to imagine with me just for a few moments that you are out in a boat with 5 other people, a little inflatable boat. And it's not on a lake. It's not even on a gently flowing river. It is out on the storm-tossed Bay of Fundy, which lies between Canada's Nova Scotia and New Brunswick provinces, and just barely touches the state of Maine in the United States. It is a cold and icy day, and you are wet and tired, and the 6 of you have been out for 36 straight hours, struggling with a 60-ton right whale. The whale's been in a tussle with a Norwegian whaling fleet, and it's gotten tangled up in some fishing lines. The fleet has now left the whale to perish. She's bloodied, she is tangled up in all of this fishing gear, and so she's having a hard time surfacing to breathe. She's frightened, she is angry and hurt, and she is really big. And all she can think about is escape. And all you can think about is not having her escape until you can get her untangled. So now it's growing dark, and the weather and the exhaustion are finally no match for the whale's determination to get free, and she breaks the lines that you've had on her. You come back to shore, and the satellites track her down the North American coast for about 800 miles before they lose track of her, so that you never find out whether she's survived or not. I tell this story that actually happened back in 1999 on a Labor Day weekend, when 6 volunteers from a group called the Disentanglement Network, men and women who on occasion risked their lives to rescue whales that whalers had wounded and left to die. And I want you just to imagine, not that you're actually part of this crew now, but I want you to imagine how much you would have to care, how much you would need to love these non-human creatures in order to want to save them. This past Thursday, April 22nd, was our 51st Earth Day. I wonder how many of you out there remember our first Earth Day. I remember it. I was a junior in high school, and it grew out in part of concern about pollution, and especially watching images of American rivers on fire from all of the contaminants that were in there. If you remember that 51 years ago, what kinds of thoughts did you have on that day? I remember thinking as a junior in high school that people were finally paying attention to the earth and the contamination that we were making on it. And I was convinced as a junior in high school that our generation was going to be the one to save the planet, that we had a unique destiny. And even though we got called whale savers and tree huggers and many, many other derogatory names, many of us over the years have tried to stay faithful to that vision of living an easier, simpler, earth-friendly life. I remember particularly when my kids were small, one of the things that I did with them was read The Lorax by Dr. Seuss. Any of you remember that book? That book was written the following year, 50 years ago, as a clarion call to industries and consumers alike to conserve the Earth's precious resources. If you remember that story, there's a Lomax that comes and tries to warn them all that they are cutting down all the truffula trees in a way that is damaging to the environment. The truffula trees are all disappearing so that they can make more needs. And industry is getting bigger and bigger and bigger as all the trees disappear. So I used to tell my kids, you know, even when we weren't reading the story, when we talked about when we would go shopping, I would say, take care to buy only as many needs as you needs, right? And the even less popular phrase that I would use with them is that environmental justice always begins at home when you learn how to clean up after yourself. So even, you know, in those simple ways, I was trying to plant seeds for the future, for a care of the earth. And yet in every corner of the world, we know we're even more at risk now than we were 51 years ago. I read an article, a couple of articles just recently in Time magazine, though, that gives me great hope. Even in these times when we're looking at devastation of the environment and climate change. The first article was by Justin Moreland, and he talked about this new recognition that we have that that every justice issue, every single justice issue that we may look at these days is tied to environmental justice and climate change. There's a new understanding of this kind of intersectionality that is something that my generation did not have. When we talked about saving the environment, we actually weren't thinking about all of the other ramifications. But now there's this sense of how everything is related to everything else, which is so in line with our seventh principle, right? The interdependent web of which we are a part. And then the second article in the Times Magazine was by Clara Nugent. And she talked about how the academic world has caught on to this concept that climate is everything, that it's related to everything. So she said that now almost every academic discipline is thinking about how to be taught through an environmental lens. So schools of architecture, for instance, are changing their courses to focus on the impact of building design on the environment. And law schools, medical schools, literature programs, economic departments, political science programs, and all are all thinking about how to incorporate climate into their curricula. They're all grappling with how to prepare their graduates for a new labor market They're planting new seeds. And this also brings me great hope. The Biden administration also is approaching policy development using this concept of intersectionality, so that the Defense Department is looking at how how the climate threatens national security, the Treasury Department, how it affects our financial system, the Justice Department, how it'll affect the crime rate, and on and on and on. Housing policy, racial justice, public health, immigration, they all intersect in many ways, but none more dramatic than through the changes in our worldwide natural environment. So climate and environmental justice, they say now, is everything. Why does this bring me hope? It brings me hope because climate scientists and environmentalists are no longer the only ones who are paying attention now. Those who care about the natural world now are in the mainstream. They're not on the sidelines anymore. We're still going to be called derogatory names. Those of us who are said to be woke, we now have a new woke culture, which has the audacity to think in terms of this intersectionality. But I also get the feeling that the term woke, even though it's trying to be used as a derogatory term, is not really being seen by many people in that way. And this also brings me hope. So it's also been the case that when you begin to have synergy between lots of different groups, when activists and the government and industry, the business world, when they all get on the same page together, this is when we can actually make lasting change together. And I believe that we are at that tipping point now. When a problem becomes really mainstream, then there are many, many ways to help heal what's broken, many ways to plant seeds of change for environmental justice. I'm going to confess to you this morning that I probably don't know enough about climate change to be an effective activist, but as a world citizen and a person of faith who is called upon to take the long view, there are some practices that I've chosen to help me to keep faith with all of the natural beauty that nourishes me every day. And I just want to talk a little bit about those practices. The first one is tithing. Now, you may not think about that in terms of environmental justice, but giving away 10% of my income is a way for me to be more mindful about my consumption and my biggering. I try to give it to organizations that I believe in, that I think are trying to meet the challenges of our day to day. The 10% I give away tells the truth about who I am. It tells the truth about what my values are, what I think of as significant, what I think of as needing change. And it's a way of telling people or remembering that you are a person of significance in this day and age, that you can make a difference in very small ways by planting seeds, by giving part of yourself. And secondly, a practice that's become even more important to me as I get into my late 60s is to listen more closely to those who are coming of age now. Young people who are coming into their power with a truly global consciousness, who've developed the appropriate brainwave patterns to fix or look at the complicated problems that we're facing today. I'm trying to put myself more and more often in places where I have the opportunity to learn from them and to listen to them and know how to support them. Because even though the people who are coming of age now are going to be leading us into the future, it's really not fair for us to just pass the baton and ask them to fix all the ways that we have screwed up. If our common life is to be more compassionate, more creative, more just, then it's going to take an intergenerational effort. We need to plant our seeds together, but we need to take their lead. And the last spiritual practice that I want to mention this morning is that I am now beginning to take the Sabbath, the idea of Sabbath, very seriously. And that is to say that once a week, I take a day to commit to step away from the rat race. And on this day, I try to fast from several things that I know increase my carbon footprint. So it's a day when I don't go shopping. It's a day when I don't eat red meat. I'm sorry, but I can't give that up totally. But I take one day and be conscious about not doing that. And it's also a day when I don't drive my car anywhere. And I call this my weekly gas fast. I decided to do this after reading a story about a theologian by the name of Charles Hartshorne, who I deeply admire. He was a process theologian. Hartshorne, way back in the 30s, could see that there was going to be some environmental damage from lots of automobiles on the road. And so he made the decision to sell his car and walk or use public transportation for the rest of his life, which he did. And when I read that story, I thought, surely I can do that at least one day a week to cut my emissions by 1/7. So that's my Sabbath. I also take this day, the Sabbath day, to be out in nature as often as I can. I'm fortunate to live close to the Eno River, so I take a walk out in the woods. I see what's budding that week, what's going on with the plants. I look for animal tracks. I see how high the water is in the river, remembering that God loves everything that she has created, and that if in fact I am made in her image, then I need to learn how to love it too. And it's really difficult to learn to love something that you don't have a relationship with, that you don't take the time to build a relationship with. So I take the time to build a relationship with the natural world, noticing, paying attention, and sometimes even grieving the changes that I see, the losses that I see in the environment. Keeping the Sabbath is another act of resistance. I believe that God has the greatest love for diversity in the natural world, and that includes all of us as well. And when we act as if we are part of this diverse world, a world where diversity itself has intrinsic value, and is not just valued for its use by us, but is appreciated for itself, then we are keeping faith with this spirit of life that has created all of this. The flower communion that Dr. Norbert Čapek developed in Czechoslovakia was introduced to the Unitarian Church of Cambridge, Massachusetts, by his wife, Maria, in 1940. And while she was in the States, the Nazis took control of Prague, where Norbert still lived, and she was unable to return. She was unable to communicate with him at all as the war started. It wasn't until after the war that she learned that her husband's gospel of inherent worth and dignity and beauty of every human person in all of our amazing diversity was, as the Nazi records showed, too dangerous for the Reich to allow him to live. And so Dr. Čapek was sent to Dachau, where he was killed that next year during a medical experiment. But the seeds he planted for our faith tradition, our flower communion that we are now going to take part in, still celebrates each year his message of human hope and decency. I am honored to be a part of this service this morning as you celebrate his memory and his gospel of hope. These words were used to bless the flowers by Dr. Čapek during each of his flower communion services. Infinite Spirit of life, we ask thy blessing on these, thy messengers of fellowship and love. May they remind us amid diversities of knowledge and of gifts to be one in desire and affection and devotion to thy holy will. May they also remind us of the value of comradeship, of doing and sharing alike. May we cherish friendship as one of the most precious gifts. May we realize that whatever we can do, great or small, the efforts of all of us are needed to do thy work in this world. Our closing hymn this morning is Blessing, performed by your Peace Fellowship Choir.
May the sun
These closing words by Dr. Seuss from the Lorax. You are in charge of the last of the truffula seeds. And the truffula trees are what everyone needs. Plant a new truffula. Treat it with care. Give it clean water and feed it fresh air. Grow a forest. Protect it from axes that hack. Then the Lorax and all of his friends may come back.